Hello and welcome to the Voices in Montessori podcast, brought to you by the Green Springs Center for Lifelong Learning. My name is Tamara Sheasley Ballas, and in today's episode, we're talking about developing student leadership through effective class meetings. My guest today is Chip DeLorenzo. Chip has been a Montessori educator since 1995. He is a teaching professor at Xavier University and the former head of school of the Damerscata Montessori School, where he spent 20 years as a teacher and administrator. Chip is the co-author with Jane Nelson of Positive Discipline in the Montessori Classroom. Welcome, Chip. We're so happy to have you here with us today.
Thanks for having me back, Tamara. It's a pleasure.
The pleasure is all ours. So we're going to talk today about leadership in the Montessori classroom and what gets in the way. So let's start out let me ask you that. What is it that gets in the way of us supporting our children in building their leadership in our Montessori classrooms?
Wow, that's a big question. There's a lot. Um, and I think, when we talk about building leadership with children, it's really important to just talk about how critical that actually is in a multi-age classroom, because we all know what it's like to have, especially if it's the oldest children in the classroom, they're either not a strong group of leaders, or sometimes they can even become negative leaders. And what those years are like, it really, I don't know about you, but when I had those years, it was like walking around with a backpack loaded with rocks throughout the year. It just adds so much on your plate as the teacher, because we can't, um, that gap can't be left unfilled. So oftentimes the adults fill that role, which tends to exacerbate the process. It actually becomes like a snowball. It becomes to exacerbate the process, because we start to step in. The children who, we would like to be leading step back even further. It creates a dependency cycle in the classroom. And at the end of the year, we're just absolutely exhausted. So to me, it's one of the most critical components in the classroom. And I think, like a lot of us, I walked into my classroom thinking that was just going to, leadership was just going to happen naturally, because children would get to that third year. They would want to lead. I would say things in the classroom like, "Hey, you really need to set an example for the younger children." And I got to tell you, I think that phrase has about a 90% failure rate. It has never worked, right? And it never, encouraged the kids to lead more just because I told them they should be leading. And so again, it winds up coming into this cycle. And we just don't, so anyway, so we don't always know how to go about changing that dynamic around. And so that's, that leaves us in a quagmire, because a lot of times it doesn't happen naturally. The children get to that third year and they just don't automatically sometimes say, "Oh yeah, I want to help the younger children."
Mhm. Okay, so you have some tools that you outline in your book, which we highly recommend. And can you talk about one that's a cornerstone of the Montessori community, the community meeting, and how that can support building children into leaders?
Sure. Well, I'll see. Yeah, and I'll start with an anecdote. One year when I was well into my teaching career at this point, I had a boy in my classroom who was pretty popular. It was an upper elementary classroom, and he was a pretty popular boy in the classroom. He was a third year student, and he was really, the other kids followed him, and he was definitely that quintessential negative leader that was starting and that dynamic was starting to take place in the classroom. And I would conference with my students every week, and this was something that he and I would talk about. And I was working with him on skills, and in the parent conference, I shared with his mom what my goal for him was, and what we were doing and how he was progressing with it. And she asked me a really wise question. Luckily, I had the answer for it. But she said, does he know what leadership even means? What do you mean by that? And luckily, since I had been doing class meetings for years, I was able to give an affirmative. Absolutely, he knows what it means. And here's why. And so the reason I was able to say that is because is part of the structure of our classroom using positive discipline in the Montessori classroom is that we use the class meeting, which actually becomes almost like a leadership lab within the community. And what is leadership but really helping to support other people for the growth of the community? And that's, if we take a servant-based perspective of leadership, it's the way that we serve the community and model and help. So in the class meeting, the whole purpose of a class meeting is to work together to solve problems, right? So at the beginning of the year, most of us all start off by setting the ground rules, and hopefully we're inviting the children into that as part of that process, right? And they help identify the limits that we're going to be setting and maintaining in the classroom. They help us establish routines and ground rules and help teach grace and courtesy skills. So in terms of building a community where it has freedom within limits, we invite the children in to take part in that. And that's really that piece is really the first period in that process. The second period really happens when we have to maintain those limits as adults, and we model for the children and we follow through. And the children, they test limits, and we run into problems naturally. That's their job, right? Limits aren't limits until they're tested. So I always joke around, say, children don't test the limits to drive us to drink. What they're really doing is they're making sure that the environment is secure, right? They want to know that the adults in the community, that we say what we mean what we say without being mean, right? And so that second period is really critical because the children are learning just like they would with the materials through their experience. But as they navigate the social emotional environment, the way that they learn through their experience, again, just like with the materials, is they make a lot of mistakes. We bump into each other. The third period of that process really is when they're actually utilizing that information, right? And they're applying it. And that's what happens in the class meeting, because what we do in the class meeting is we come together to solve problems in the community. So we set the limits together, the kind of code of conduct or the constitution for our classroom. The teachers help model and maintain the limits in the classroom. And then when we run into problems, we work together to solve those problems. And it's in that setting that the children participate in that problem solving, where they actually they're supporting and helping one another. And so that's where they really start to learn how to lead outside of that setting, right? And so that's the overall model. When we there probably is there's nothing that I have found to be more potent to developing a sense of community and a sense of belonging and significance for children than using the class meeting. And one of the questions I often ask when I'm working with teachers is how many of you remember the times where you built your deepest friendships? And the answer is usually, isn't it really when you've been in a vulnerable time in your life? Maybe people that you met when you were first out of the house and going to college, and we build these bonds with these people when we need them, right? And what the class meeting does, because it's a problem solving model, is it allows that vulnerability to be happening in the classroom all the time, right? So that children, they come into the community meeting with their problems from their peers to help get them solved. Their peers not only learn from helping them solve problems, but when they bring their own to the meeting, and children feel supported and they give that support to one another. And what happens is that starts to bleed out into the community. And that's when you see the children actually start to step up when the community's made a decision, and they start to help the teacher actually maintain the limits in the classroom. I shouldn't even say it's not even a good way to say that. It's that they're not helping the teacher, they're helping the community, right?
Mhm.
We feel helped because when you share responsibility, there's a huge weight that comes off your shoulders as a leader, and a lot of trust that you're putting into the kids.
Wow. Okay. So there's so much there. I have so many questions. So let's start with, I think I want to start with actually asking you to define leadership the way you defined it for that mom that day, because I think that will help. What does leadership actually look like in a Montessori classroom? How do you know that it's happening?
So I'll just, you know, I'll give you my version of leadership and based on my experience from this, and that is that leadership is just a way to serve others, to support the community and to support one another, um, so that we're all being successful, right?
Love that. Love that. And then you talked about really this 3 period lesson in the community meeting, and as these young people are learning, can you talk a little bit about what the agenda looks like for a meeting, and what does it really look like as you're flowing through these different periods of the lesson with different students? Does that make sense? You've got some who are in the 3rd period, they're your 3rd years,
Mhm.
they are taking more leadership. What does that look like in the classroom? How do you know that they're ready? Are they
Mhm.
stepping in before they're ready sometimes just to learn the skills? I guess that's about 6 questions in there. You can
Well,
whatever
yeah.
thread you'd like from there.
So let's just start off with the agenda and kind of what that looks like, and I think some of the other questions will really bleed into that. So first of all, the meeting agenda is has been hammered out on the anvil of decades of experience, and a lot of us, in training or through, our colleagues had, kind of came out with a concept of like a community meeting. So when I was working with adolescents and when I was working with elementary students, I heard a lot about that, like kind of a weekly community meeting where we get together, we work on problems as a group, um, and they can be really tricky without some real understanding of how those processes work. And so, one of the things that was a huge relief to me when I first started practicing class meetings from a positive discipline perspective is that uh, this format and this structure had been really ironed out by other people, and tweaked and reworked over years. And so it really kind of it shortened the learning curve to actually make the meeting effective. And so what that process looks like, or what that structure looks like in a meeting is that the main part of it is problem solving. So that's the middle, and I'll just start off there because that's really the big piece, and that is where a child will share their problem with the group. And the problem could be an individual problem, like I'm having difficulty getting my work done during the work period. Has anybody else struggled with this? This is what seems to be happening for me, and I'd love to hear what other people have to say. It could be a group problem where, this is a problem that affects the whole community. So maybe every time I go into the bathroom, it's a mess. There's papers all over the floor. There's water on the mirror, and it's really frustrating. I don't like even going to the bathroom because it's really messy. And so let's talk. That's a problem that's not going to just affect me. It probably affects many people. And so, and that we're going to try to solve that all together. It could be an interpersonal problem. And this is a really, these are really important problems to be solving at the elementary and adolescent, which is maybe a couple of people, 2, 3 people are having difficulties interacting with one another. They've used the conflict resolution process, and now they're coming to the group to get some support and just some help to work through this problem together. Yeah. So those are the types of problems that would be solved. And then from there, what happens is the children have some time to discuss it and share their perspective on the problem, and then either offer an individual ideas that they can choose from to help them solve their individual problem, or the group works together on brainstorming ideas about what we could do to solve a collective problem, or to help support kids who are having difficulty, with their relationship. And so in that process, what happens is every day is that, the kids are really coming and bringing some real difficulties that are happening in the classroom. And I'll talk more about the benefits, in a little bit, but that's the meat of the meeting. That's the center of the meeting. Now, on either side of that, you have the introduction, and what happens in the introduction part of the meeting is, and this, we always start off with something connective. A main concept that we have in positive discipline is the idea of connection before correction, right? So we're going to use that in the meeting. So at this point, we do, compliments and appreciations. And essentially, each child gets a chance to share a compliment or an appreciation for somebody else in the classroom. And a compliment is simply a compliment on another person's accomplishments or something that they've done. And an appreciation is a thank you for a contribution, something that somebody's done to help out, either to the community or to an individual child. And it's really interesting, when you start off like that, it usually takes about 7-8 minutes to, for a group of 28, 30 kids to go through that. Children really get a chance to encourage and support each other and acknowledge the contributions that people are making to the community. And especially at the, when you're working with 3 to 6-year-olds, it's a really sweet time, and, they haven't developed that critical mindset yet. But as kids get into lower and upper elementary, they tend to have a critical memory for the things that didn't go well, the slights, the resentment they might have had, and they quickly hold on to those things. What that period at the beginning of the meeting, the compliments and appreciation, does really nicely is it allows us to really start to focus on the positive things that people are doing, and use that critical mind to be thinking about contributions rather than withdrawals from the community. Yeah.
Mhm.
And then we go into problem solving, and then at the end of the meeting, you usually end with something that's connective. Like it could be kids taking turns doing poetry reading, or I always actually used to like to end mine with jokes. Somebody could come up with a joke that was appropriate for the classroom and share. One year we did riddles. The kids wanted to do those. They wanted to make up their own after kids started sharing riddles. They were horrible. Nobody could ever figure them out. And we found out quickly that riddles are more difficult to make up than you'd think, right? And so it ends. I had a teacher of my who worked for me who did like a really short team building game at the end of each class meeting that took about a minute or two. So we sandwich it. We start with something positive, we end with something positive. In the middle, the meat and potatoes, we really take time to solve problems that are affecting the community. And in that process, it's really amazing. I mean, the kids, the classroom really starts to gel. And in that process of problem solving, that's where the children begin to pick up leadership skills. They learn empathy, right? Because kids are sharing from the heart about what might be going on for them. They learn to see things from other people's perspective. Because one of the things that happens in that class meeting is that different people have different takes on a problem, right? So there might have been an incident that happened in the classroom, and as we get older, we all have our perceptions and interpretations about what happens in an event. But just like if you went to a family gathering, you're telling an old story and you're like, whoa, that is not what happened. the same thing happens in a class meeting where children share their different perspectives, and they understand that just because something happened doesn't mean that everybody interpreted the events the exact same way. And so children learn that different people have different perspectives on different problems, and those perspectives, or those events, impact people differently. And even the quietest kids, sometimes children don't bring up a problem in the class meeting until they feel really comfortable. But that doesn't mean that they don't start learning immediately, because a lot of times their help and when they help in solving somebody else's problem or a community problem, just like for us, when we help a friend, a lot of times we learn as much by helping a friend as they learn from asking us for help, right? And so that quickly starts to bleed into the rest of the classroom. So I'll just give you a quick example. So, let's say that the classrooms, I had this happen to me one year. I tend to be pretty, when I was in the classroom, I tended to be pretty fastidious. It was, the thing that I loved about the classroom environment when I first walked into it as a new teacher was I loved the order, right? It just really, that was what really stuck with me. It drew me to Montessori. I got it. I understood what it was for. And I always prided myself on having a really orderly classroom until one year, right? Where no matter how much preparation I did and how much follow through I did, the kids were just leaving their materials all over the place. Pieces of the materials were someplace else. And it was driving me, personally, it was driving me nuts. But I kind of just bit my knuckle, and I said, okay, this is gonna, let's wait until this comes up on the class meeting. And eventually it did. And this boy, Tommy, he brought the issue to the class meeting one day. And I remember him sharing about it. And it was really funny, because the first thing that happened to me is after he shared about how frustrated he was because he couldn't find the materials he needed, or if he went to get, let's say a science experiment, a piece would be missing, and he had spent 10 minutes trying to find it. And he was sharing his exasperation with the disorder in the environment. And I remember I felt like I was like 12 years old, and I just wanted to say, yeah, me too, Tommy, me too. Like, it's nuts, right? And the kids started to talk about it, and they started to, I don't even remember what we came up with, but one of the things I noticed almost immediately is that, we had come up with some ideas about how to handle the situation when it happened. And almost immediately, the children started to correct each other in the classroom. Like, hey, we decided that we're going to put our materials back, right? Because it turns out that Tommy and I weren't the only ones with the problem. A lot of people were having a problem with it, and it was frustrating to a lot of people. And then they began to exhibit that leadership, in the classroom. And so not only was it, for me, just personally and selfishly, was it nice to hear that somebody else had a problem with that as a community member, but it was a huge relief to see that I wasn't alone as the teacher in following through and upholding the limits or the ground rules or the decisions that we made in the classroom, that it really was shared leadership. Yeah.
Mm. That's such a beautiful story. And would you, as a teacher, never bring something to community meeting? Are you always waiting for them to bring things forward? Because I think that's a really good point. I think a community meeting can easily turn into this time where the teacher, because we have family meetings at our house.
Mhm.
And
Yes.
I love the family meetings. My children are not as big of fans as the family meetings, because usually I have the issues list, right?
Right.
Part of it is we're working through the issues that I have, but they could, they don't have those same issues. They're like, yeah, it's going great.
Right.
Right.
Their priorities are different. Yes.
Right. And so, do you, as a teacher, ever bring things up at community meeting?
Sure. So anyone in the community can put something on the agenda. Now, as a teacher, I would be judicious in how I put things on the class meeting agenda. So usually my guideline, this is just for myself, and different teachers might do it differently, was if I had a kind of, to use a phrase that's going around, if I had a dog in the fight, then I would tend to put it on. like in that case with the classroom being disordered, I saw it affecting other children. So strategically, I always know it's more with older kids. That was an upper elementary classroom. It's always more potent if they bring it up. So if I feel like it's starting to cause some difficulty and a child shares something with me, I might suggest to them, hey, why don't you put that on the class meeting agenda?
Mhm.
Um, or sometimes the child will just bring it up. And so unless it was causing a really significant problem, I usually let the kids try to bring it up. And then if I had a dog in the fight, or if I had a real issue with something that was going on, then I would bring it up. I tried to give myself a percentage of maybe about 10% of the problems to be in the meeting, because to your point, if it's coming from the kids, that lands a lot differently. And it includes their perspective and their priorities, which is tricky, because a lot of times, one of the mistakes I've made as a teacher is I want the kids to have the same priorities as I do. And it doesn't mean that my priorities are not valid. They are, and they're important, because I'm the ultimate leader in the classroom. But if the kids can bring it up, a problem with their perspective and their priorities, um, we're the idea is to maintain this environment of really dignity and respect for everybody. So there's some equality in the relationship with the children, and a trust that's getting placed in them. People do better when they feel trusted.
100%. So how do you support the children? Because my understanding is when you're in this kind of class meeting or community meeting, you are supporting the children in operating with dignity and respect. So
Mhm.
what happens when a child is not being respectful of others? There's blame in the language. The way that I used to run my class meetings, it's been a long time,
Yeah.
was that there couldn't be any judgment or criticism, and that
Mhm.
we weren't going to call anyone out. But I don't know if those parameters are the best parameters. So can you share how you operated that component of it?
So a big piece of the class meeting is taking some time for training at the beginning of the year. So, one of the things that I'll always advocate uh, is really breaking down that agenda in the meeting and actually practicing those parts of the meeting with fictitious problems or mock problems, and talking about some of the potential difficulties that can come up, and teaching the children the skills on how to prevent some of those problems from happening. So for instance, like using blame language, that's especially, that's going to happen from 3 to 6 all the way up and through adolescence. And so uh, a skill that you would teach the children to avoid that potentially from happening is that we use I messages and I language when we share a problem, rather than blame language. And at the beginning of the year, just like I would with other ground rules, we would role play that. What does it sound like when somebody's blaming? And we process it. How's that going to land? How's that going to affect the problem solving? And then we'll try it with I language. And how does that land? How might that open up communication? And so the children know what's expected. So if a child was sharing something in a meeting and they were using some basically third person language, or I mean second person language, I call it you language, right? Then I would I'm the facilitator, the ultimate facilitator. So at that point, I would say, hey, could you please use I language to share this problem? And it's amazing when they do that, it shifts the whole tone of their message, right? Um, and it's inevitable that
Do you
children are
healing words there? Like, just so if they're using iMessages, they're talking about I feel, I'm assuming that I feel frustrated when the materials aren't on the shelf.
right, right. So blame language might sound like nobody's leaving they're putting their stuff away. I can't find anything. I'm trying to get my work done. I'm spending about 20 minutes every morning looking for stuff, and I'm just really frustrated. So that's blame language, right? So I language would be like, I'm feeling really frustrated. I felt angry yesterday because I had a lot to do and I was trying to get my work done. and I couldn't find the materials, and it took me an extra 20 minutes. And I really wish we could figure out a way together to make sure things get put back where they belong so that I and other people can, you know, can use our work time to work, or, you know, so I don't have to look around. And that comes across obviously very different because now I'm taking ownership of my own feelings. It's a problem that I'm having, and I'm asking for help.
So you separate out, I think, first of all, I just want you to know, I think every human being could use a lesson on what you just said.
Yeah.
Like, it's such a good reminder to every single one of us of how quickly we go to blame, especially with people we're in close relationship with, proximity with.
Sure.
Um, but if you are working with students to build these skills, because you're teaching all of these great social emotional skills, all of these great leadership skills, are those lessons outside of the community meeting? So let's say I noticed that the children are having a hard time understanding somebody else's perspective, and I've got a great lesson on that, right, where I bring in a beach ball that has all different colors all around it, and I put it between a couple of children, and I say, tell me about this beach ball, and they say it's green and blue, and I
Mhm.
say to the other person, tell me about the beach ball, and they said it's red and pink, and I'm like, you're both looking at the beach ball, why can't you get, you're not and it helps them to, and we use that framework, then from then on we could say, my side of the beach ball, it looks like, right, and so we get to see how perspective, but that lesson, for example, would be given separately from class meeting.
So yes and no. So this is such a, gosh, that's such a big topic. But in the beginning of the year, they're going to be, just so we all have the grace and courtesy skills that we teach at the beginning of the year. Kind of the in the larger education setting, they're calling them a lot of those SEL, social emotional lessons, learning outside of Montessori, but we've always referred to it as grace and courtesy, right? And so
Sure.
these are grace and courtesy lessons, and so there's going to be a handful that we're going to teach that just have to deal with operating in the classroom, and then I always have, I've got a handful that I always teach critical lessons for making the class meeting to be successful, and so I would teach those at the beginning, and then one of the things I always recommend is that once this meeting is going, is that through observation, the teacher, we then look to see if there are any lagging skills in the environment. So if we're seeing, let's say outside of the class meeting, we're seeing children having a hard time, there's a lot of exclusion going on in the classroom, right? So there might be a couple of grace and courtesy lessons to teach in there. And so it might be how do you ask a group to play with them in a way that's going to be respectful to them and maybe more effective than what you're doing. How do you handle when somebody, another skill would be how do you say no respectfully so that the other person can hear it and not feel excluded, right? Um, so there's just a couple examples. And so if you're seeing a lot of that happen in the classroom, you might bring that into the class meeting and teach. And so what I used to do is actually, especially towards the end of my teaching tenure, uh, is that I would choose one of those class meetings a week where it was specifically to teach a lagging skill that I saw in the environment, and we would practice it and we would role play it. Uh, and I wouldn't let the kids in on how I came up with that particular skill. It was just based on my observations. And then the other side is it just happens. Some of it just happens organically in the class meeting because the children, like let's say exclusion came up on the meeting. Other kids are going to say, hey, this is what I do. And this is what I do when that happens. And we come up with a list of ideas. And just through that brainstorming, children begin to put things together for themselves, which is what we want them to do in the first place, right? We don't want to always stay in that direct teaching mold. And there's, it's really what I think is I'm seeing a lot of it is that, I was talking to one school that I worked with over the last few years, and they just bought this really fancy SEL curriculum. And I'm like, why? You have it, right? You have it all. And they said, oh my gosh, you're right, right? Like this is what we do. I said, but there's, I understand having been ahead of school for a long time, you start getting questions from parents. There's a lot of pressure, to do these things. And so sometimes we grab a hold of a program to try to fix that. But it's all there. It's really all there. And the problem with the thing I just want to share more about on that is that it really has become in vogue lately to take time to focus in on doing direct teaching of social skills. And that's important, but I also want to say that if we've been teaching grace and courtesy in the classroom, not only in primary, but through elementary, we do have a lot of that already, right? We have a lot of that already. And, we've seen in the last few years children needing more and more of that. So it's not a wrong thing to do. It's really needed. But if children can also have the framework on rather than just direct teaching, but actually practicing and using that information in real life with real situations to do problem solving, they're going to learn it just much more deeply and in a Montessori way, right? Because if we're just doing direct teaching of social skills, that's just like staying stuck in the first period and asking the kids to regurgitate the information. Whereas when you have the class meeting, we're actually learning through our experience. It's self-correcting. We're learning from our mistakes. And that's how we learn in Montessori.
Mhm. And how many times a week? Because you just said one time a week for elementary, you would use it for lessons. How many times a week are you recommending community meeting or class meeting?
So I would recommend in a primary classroom every day, but in the primary classroom it's different because they're really short meetings. It's a very similar process, but it's a little bit more simplified, and it takes about 10 minutes, right? And so when I was a primary teacher, I would just do it at the end of the work cycle before we transitioned to go outside, because we came to circle anyway, right? And it was so powerful in building a sense of community that it actually took the place of a lot of other things that I was trying to do to build community. And then at the elementary level, probably 3 to 4 times a week. I usually did mine about 4, with one of those meetings being focused on just on a grace and courtesy lesson. And then the other 3 meetings to do problem solving. And I also did them at the same time. I did them at the beginning, right at the end of a work cycle. Some people I know do them at the beginning of the day. I know there's some research out there that says that having those morning community meetings can be really grounding and actually help kids at the elementary level academically as well as socially when they come in and they connect first thing in the morning. And so I think there's real validity in that. I always get the question, how on earth can I fit this in? I already have so much on my plate. And what I can share on that is just my experience, and that is that I tell people that you will save much more time doing this 4 days a week for 20 minutes each day than you will ever spend investing in the class in the class meeting. And it's really that difference between spending time and investing time. Because one of the things that the class meeting really does is that it allows you to actually teach during the morning. A lot of the problems that kids come up with to midday, mid work cycle, you can say, hey, listen, that's a really valid problem. I understand why you could be so frustrated. Would you like to put that on the class meeting to see if you can get some help? Yeah. And that not only helps, that gives them a place where they know that it's going to be taken care of. But it also gives them a little bit of space so that they have some time to cool down. And one of the really neat things that happens sometimes is when a child puts something on the class meeting agenda and it comes up a couple days later, is you ask them, is this still a problem? And sometimes it's no, it's not. I figured it out. Right? And you know what? It's a lot better that they figured it out rather than when we say, you know what, you can figure this out yourself, right? Which is condescending and disrespectful. And we might really mean it. We do have trust in them to figure it out, but that's not what they want to hear in a moment when they're hurting or where they're frustrated with something. But I started going off on a little bit of tangent. So let me just also answer the question directly, because it was really a good one. The problem with having the class meeting infrequently is that it winds up, when it's once a week or it's infrequently, it winds up being a teacher-led meeting, because the teacher starts deciding what's going to be important, what's not going to be important, that comes up on the agenda. The other thing is that if kids are putting things on the agenda and it's only happening once a week, you're going to wind up with more problems in there than you can ever solve. And so then who decides which gets, what gets solved? And finally, it takes some practice for the group to become problem solvers, right? So when that woman asked me that mom asked me a question about leadership and does my child know what it means? Is he being supported in this process? I could say with absolute certainty, yeah, we do this almost every day, and he's making big strides, right? Because the group problem solving, even as a teacher, it takes real practice to learn how to do it well, and it takes a group practice to group time to practice to learn how to do it well. So at the beginning of the year, your class meetings look very different than they do at the end of the year, right? Because they've made a lot of progress in working together and solving problems over that period of time. So if you don't do it frequently enough, the kids don't get the practice. It becomes more adult centered, and a lot of times the meeting it won't generate all the benefits that we've already started to talk about.
So you just said that the guide also has to have significant skills. Can you talk about some of those skills that you see as being critical for the
Mhm.
guide to have in order for these to be successful?
I think the first skill to have is being courageous enough to make some mistakes, right? Because you'll never start off the class meeting being able to facilitate it perfectly. But take heart, because the structure itself is um, provides a lot of guardrails, right? I think the other thing is a willingness to trust children. I think there's probably no other tool that I used in managing the classroom that allowed me to learn how to trust children, which I didn't realize that I needed to learn how to do until I started realizing, wow, they're really capable, right? Kids are incredibly capable problem solvers. And whether we're Montessori trained or not, so many times we tend to step in and solve problems for children out of expediency, and maybe in the back of our mind out of a lack of trust in their ability to get through it. Um, and the class meeting, it offers this safe, structured time every day where I've got the ability to turn it over to the kids, so freedom, but with some limits, so that they can learn how to solve a lot of these problems themselves. And so being able to be willing to trust the children that they're capable and they can really, with your help, solve some of these problems is necessary. Um, and I think those are the really the two most important skills you need to start. A lot of the others have been kind of this get handled by the structure of the meeting itself.
Well, and I think those are skills and qualities that we want to be modeling for our children anyway, because when you're being courageous and
Yeah.
saying, I know we haven't been doing, let's say we've got a listener and they haven't really been doing these class meetings, and they're also really seeing that their leadership is not evolving in their classroom and they really want to step into this. It's a fundamental principle of a Montessori classroom and they decide to take it on. They can say to their their students, I haven't been doing this. I know it's gonna take me a bit to learn, and I'm having to really use my courage here. And what a
Yeah.
gift to those children to know that their hero, right? We're in hero worship territory in the elementary,
Yeah.
is willing to try something that scares them or that they know they may not be good at right out of the gate in order to best serve the community. What a gift for those children.
It's huge. And we talk about self-correcting for the children and how important that is. But not only is the structure, the class meeting structure, self-correcting for the kids, it's self-correcting for the whole community, including the adults. So if something's getting off kilter in the meeting, so like one of the things that can happen in elementary classrooms is that children figure out when they're doing compliments and appreciations that what a backhanded compliment is, right? And so you hear a child say, "Hey, I want to thank you for finally coming in, not wearing, not walking all over my work today," right? So that's not really a compliment, right? So, and if you start to see that dynamic happen, guess what? We have a class meeting that can solve problems that are happening with the class meeting,
Mm,
right? And so when teachers always say, "What if this happens?" or "What if that happens?" Well, that's the if you're doing consistent class meetings, if you're running into problems in that community meeting, then bring it up. Um, and guaranteed, this happens all the time. Guaranteed, if you're having a problem with it as a teacher, there are children in the classroom that are having the same problem. Yeah. And that's one of the really big insights that I had when I started doing these meetings, that like that example with Tommy and the messy classroom. How I look like one of the things I learned is that a lot of the things that I was concerned about, the kids also were concerned about. And I didn't realize that because it doesn't always look like that. So if you've got a group of children who are, maybe they're being disrespectful during lunchtime, right? And it's easy to, as a teacher, to generalize that that's happening for the whole class, and the whole class is kind of involved in this because you might have some kids kind of parroting their behavior and some other kids maybe being more passive. And it might look like in that moment that the whole class is involved in this disrespect cycle during lunch. But when it comes out in the class meeting, and assuming the class meeting is a safe place for people to talk about it, it gives a place for children who seem to be in the minority to have a voice. And then what you realize really quickly is that what you thought was a minority is actually a lot of the kids are feeling uncomfortable with the disrespect that's happening during lunch. And when the kids start to pipe up about that, that is a much different message than the teacher saying, "You guys need to be compassionate to these other kids who are, like our, lecturers work on children in 2024 about as well as they did when we were growing up, right?" And so as a teacher, you really get a chance to learn that the children, oftentimes their priorities, they have different life priorities because they're a lot younger than us, and they're still developing. But in terms of the classroom and the security and the safety of the classroom, kids want a safe, secure environment to operate in, even though it doesn't look like it sometimes.
mhm. And they're counting on us to create a structure around that. Okay,
Right.
I think we have time for really one more question,
Sure.
and I wanna make sure that if there's anything else you want to include, you have time to do that, but
Yeah.
my question is, what happens when you have a student in the classroom who is just innately a leader,
Mhm.
and they are uh, we've had situations where we have a leader that is not interested in giving up any of that leadership. And
Sure.
they, they kind of can hold court. And the other students really aren't willing to stand up because there's a lot of power there.
Right. They have social capital, and there's a power imbalance that happens in the classroom.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll answer that. I'll just with a story that I have. So that boy who I told you about, where I had that conversation with the mother in a parent teacher conference. He was actually started to try to derail the class meeting. So he would come up with sarcastic ideas, and he would say, well, that's not even a problem. I don't think anybody has a problem. He had some social capital in the group, and so the kids started to quiet the kids down. So it's interesting. So what and one time I believe he even brought up in the class meeting, why do we have these stupid class meetings? I think they're silly and it's a waste of time. So I said, well, that's fine. You don't have to come, right? And I talked to him a little bit after the meeting. He says, sounds like you really don't want to be coming to the class meeting. He says, no, I don't want to. And my friends don't either. And I said, that's okay. Have them come and talk to me. And so 3 of these kids came and they said, we don't want to even participate in the class meeting. We think it's stupid. I said, great. You don't have to do it. It's an option. So just what would you like to do instead? And they said, well, we want to work on our work. So I set it up with another teacher where they could go down and do their work in another classroom where we had the class meeting. So about a week later, one of the kids brings up in the class meeting that they wanted to have a classroom pet. Right? I had stepped back into the classroom to replace a teacher, so I was also head of school. I did not have a classroom pet because I didn't want a classroom pet, and I didn't because I know who winds up being responsible for the classroom pet, right? And some and but the kids brought it up, so I'm like, what are you going to do, right? So we talked about some different ideas, and they wanted to get it. It turns out in that class meeting, the group decided they wanted to get a chinchilla. We were in Maine at the time. Chinchillas weren't allowed as a pet in Maine, which we found out later because they had to go do some research. So they decided to get, I forgot what it was, like a hamster or a guinea pig instead. And what I had told the boys when I said, you don't have to come to the class meeting, is I said, if you ever want to come back, just talk to me. But we need to set up a plan together on how you're going to re-enter the class meeting, because in truth, it's not working for me either, right? Remember, it takes 2 to have a power struggle, right? So I stepped out of the power struggle. So they heard that they came to me, these 3 boys, and they were incensed. What do you mean you're doing a class pet? We can't, they can't get a class pet without, I said, whoa, 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 no, I'm sorry, you opted out of the class meeting. If you want to come back in at any time, that's fine, but you got to bring me a plan. And then we have to discuss that plan and you can come back. Well, before they even had a chance to do that, we had ordered the pet, we had named the pet, right? And those boys quickly came back with a plan on how to come back into the class meeting. And we didn't have a problem for the rest of the year, right? And so the class meeting is a really powerful component because not only are you discussing problems, you're coming up with ideas. I had one group of kids, and I'll end with this. And they, and by the way, for those of you who are 3 to 6 teachers, I'm sorry, I've taken up a lot of time talking about my experience in the elementary, but the same process works with 3 to 6-year-olds. We were studying the 13 colonies, and just so happens I had 13 children in my classroom that year. So I had this wonderful idea that I would give the children a chance to choose one of the colonies, right? But when I set up the lesson, I didn't make it clear that they each had to choose one of the 13. And it turns out that like 12 out of the 13 chose Jamestown, and one of them chose Roanoke, right? So I just, I had been teaching long enough where I was like, all right, let's go with this. Let's see what happens, right? But it was really interesting. The kids got on fire about Jamestown, and it was just, that's all they talked about. And they got deep into it and so much research. I figured out some other ways to teach the 13 colonies. And in one of the lessons, I shared with them that when I worked down in your area, down in DC, I used to take my adolescent students to Jamestown every year on our Odyssey trip. So about a week later in the agenda, it comes up, says Jamestown field trip. Now we're in Maine, it's 14 hours away. These are kids who were in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, right? Completely different scenario. And so my first reaction was, no, we can't. I can't take all of you guys on a week-long field trip to Jamestown, right? It's not. But they talked about it. We shared about it, and I said, here's the problem. It's not in the budget. It's a really long time. I don't think everybody's parents are going to feel comfortable. Some of you guys are only 9 years old, getting in a 15 passenger van with me and somebody else and going away for 4 or 5 days. And so one of the kids says, well, can you ask our parents and see if it's okay? What am I going to say about it? So I said, all right, but here's the deal. If I ask your parents, I'm going to do it. It's a blind ask. If just one parent says no, like that's it. It's it. We're not going to do it. Right. So I emailed the parents. I let them know what happened in the class meeting. And of course, all 13 parents, or I think emailed me back and said, yeah, that would be fine.
Great, take them.
So I said to the kids in the next class meeting, we don't have this in the budget. So here's our next, like, this is about a $5,000 trip at the time. You have to earn all this money, and we're not doing it in a fake way. Like, we're not going to do brownie sales because you can't sell enough brownies to make $5,000. And so I set up some parameters that they had to earn the money on their own outside of school through doing jobs and that kind of things. And I got parent buy-in that they weren't just going to give their kids the $300 or $400. And 4 weeks later, they all come back with their money, right? Right. So in April, we're like headed down to Jamestown. Like, I never thought this was going to happen, right?
Amazing.
I got to tell you, I've done a lot of field trips in my life with kids, but I swear those kids, they literally 3 or 4 of the kids got out of the van and they kissed the ground when we got down to Williamsburg. And I got no group of kids in my career ever loved the field trip. I mean, they owned that thing, right? And so kids are incredibly capable problem solvers when we give them the opportunity to do it. Do we have time for one more, or do we have to end?
No, go ahead.
So I want to share one more story in a class meeting that happened with the 3 to 6 year olds. This is in our book, but it was really funny. So like a lot of schools, we in our primary classroom, we had a snack table and a little snack area where the kids would go to have snack, and had the same problem that most of us have in the snack area, which is some kids aren't getting snack on time and people are leaving a mess, and then you have kids who are waiting for the snack area. So this one classroom we had had a lot of problems with snack that year. And the teacher made specifically around kids being able to get snack when they wanted it. And so she put a waiting chair, right? So the kids they could sit and wait for the next person to leave. And then that was starting to cause problems. So she made like a necklace to wait for the waiting chair. And so when they saw, then they have that, and then who knows, maybe there was a ring for the necklace and the necklace for the waiting chair, right? So so one day a child puts this on the class meeting agenda, one of the 5-year-olds in the classroom. So she said, I did my work all morning and I'm not really hungry until, before it's time to go out. And I really want to get some snack. And when I go to the snack area, a lot of it's gone and there's not enough for me to eat. So they talked about, they talked a little bit about what was happening, and the teacher asked questions, how many people have ever gone over to the snack area and there's not enough food? Like, most of the kids raised their hand. And she said, well, how many of you have ever maybe taken a little bit more than what was on the sign? And a bunch of kids raised their hand, right? And so, well, what are we going to do about this? And so they started listing some ideas, right? We'll have the snack police, or, we'll put everything in cups, and, some normal things that the kids might come up with. And one of the kids, who was also a 5-year-old, said, why don't we just do what we do at lunchtime? And you can take the snack to any table in the classroom and eat it. We have cleaning kits that we use for lunch, and we'll just use those to clean up after ourselves. And then we can use that other table for a work table. And, if you see the teacher, I mean, it's like, her head started twitching, right? We have these things in Montessori that they're not necessarily Montessori pedagogy, or they're not in our albums, but they become part of culture. And the snack table is one of those things. And she's like, well, she told me after, she's like, in her mind, she's like, well, I mean, you can't not have a snack table. It's a Montessori. So she didn't have a good answer at the time. And so she said, they voted to do it. The kids wanted to give it a try. And she was really trepidatious, and it worked out. I mean, it eliminated almost every problem she was having with snack in the classroom. The kids could eat when they were hungry. They already knew how to clean up after themselves. It looked a little weird that a child might be working with the knob cylinders next to a child who's having snack, but the child would clean up their snack just like they would any other material. And I don't know if they're still doing it at the school now, but for 15 years after that, that's how the primary did snack. And it just took away. And I'm not advocating that's the way everybody has to do snack, but that was a 5-year-old who came up with that idea.
Mhm.
And it's so yeah. So I've got plenty more, but it really became one of those things where sometimes one of my flyers said, "Bring the joy back into teaching." And I think the class meeting that really did it for me. When the kids were involved, like, we become a community.
Mhm. Oh, that's so beautiful. Chip, this has been so just so inspiring, so much fun to have you on the podcast again. You have so much wisdom to share, and we feel so grateful that you've shared your time and your expertise with us today and all of our listeners.
It's so much fun, and I really want to compliment you guys on the work that you're doing. It is so fun. After the last time I started listening to the podcast, and it has been I've had such a great time listening to others, with wealth of experience, and just the fact that that's reaching so many people and using technology in a way that's constructive and helpful to the community. So just thank you for all the work that you're doing.
Well, thank you. We're very lucky we have amazing experts to bring on, you included. It really makes it such a highlight for us. At even at the school, we talk about the podcasts, and then for the center to be able to bring people all over the world, your wisdom is a real gift. So thank you.
It's an honor to be a part of it.
Yeah. And to our listeners, we want to say thank you all for sharing your time with us today. Take a look at our website, greenspringcenter.org, to view the show notes from today's episode. And we will include a link to Chip's bio and his book on our show notes so that you can pick that up. I can share with you that it's very worthwhile. He also, as we said in the intro, leads workshops. We send our staff to his workshops all the time. We highly recommend them. Everyone who's come back from those has said it's absolutely so valuable. So we invite you to subscribe to our podcast and hear the latest episodes and join in the conversation on Facebook and Instagram. The truth is, the work that you all do is the most important work, and we're here to help. Join us next time.